Reading. Next to speaking, is probably one of the most important skills that we as human beings can learn. It's arguably one of the best ways to learn, is one of the easiest ways to communicate with other people, and it's also the densest way to communicate with people and get complex ideas. I am an avid reader. I have been putting up books like since I was a little kid. I absolutely love reading, and at any given point I'm currently reading 5 to 6 books, and I just kind of tear through them. I've been reading so long that I have noticed something that I wanted to talk about today, and that is the prevalence and increasing number of audiobooks. Now, I have nothing against audiobooks. In fact, I have this Audible subscription, and I listen to podcasts. But I feel that something that is lost in the prevalence of audiobooks is the importance of reading. And so today I want to talk about what makes reading special and why we should all make time for reading in our lives. And I want to do that by first looking at what I consider the most important part about reading, and that is the engagement of the imagination. The second would be the control that the reader has over the rate that they're reading the book. And finally, it is the enjoyment of the art of writing. Now, imagination. Writing and reading is a very unique process. When you think about, you go to a museum, you look at a painting, you see the painting on the wall, you see the ship, the flower. That is something that you can see, and you don't have to necessarily think, oh, that's it. Well, depending on who you're looking at, you don't have to think that's a ship. And the same thing when you listen to a song. You hear an instrument, you hear what the song is saying. But reading is different. For reading, the words don't exist anywhere. The story does not exist anywhere except in your mind. You are the one, you are the medium, you are the instrument that is taking in the story, and you are using your imagination to create the story. This is something that is incredibly challenging to do, and it's something that's important because imagination, as I'm sure we're all aware, is a source of inspiration. It's also the source for creativity. It provides a lot of content and meaning to our lives. And what reading does is I consider it almost like going to the gym, because not only are we stretching our imagination out, we're also having to build the story in our head. We're learning ideas that can be only conveyed through writing because they're so complex. We're also seeing conversations from different viewpoints. You can look at it through the eyes of a narrator, first person, second person. I've heard of someone trying to write a book in third person. I don't know what that's like. But writing and reading provides a way for us to build our imagination. And imagination is something that makes life worth living. It helps us to interpret the world that we're around us, to find meaning in our relationships and with the world that we find ourselves in. And something that gets lost in Audible books is that when you listen to an audiobook, it comes kind of prepackaged. It has the narrator is not just a mechanical voice, the text-to-speech robotic one. They're providing content. They're reading it in a certain way. They'll sometimes they'll use different voices for different characters. They'll enunciate certain points. They'll make dramatic pauses. All small little details that, when it comes to writing and reading, those are the responsibility of the reader to create and to find those through the writing. And when you separate that out, you create a barrier and a disconnect between the story that is being listened to and the person who's doing the listening. It's a small barrier, and I'm not saying that it can't be overcome by careful listening, but it is more challenging to do. Which brings me into what is the next part that I find with audiobooks really cuts into the reading experience, and that is the control of the pace. So reading is not just simple a metric, words per minute, something that you could finish a book in a week. Reading is a very dynamic parameter. It's something that changes as we read. If we read something difficult, we slow down. We read something exciting, we speed up. We get confused, we stop. And then the next part of the pace is we reread. We can reread a sentence multiple times. We can flip back to a page when we need to reread something because we're, well, wait, what just happened in this plot that was confusing? We can do that with much greater ease than you can with an audiobook. And where that's important is that when you're listening to an audiobook, you get it in a highly linear fashion. True, there are options for rewinding 15 seconds and chapters and different modes of interacting with it, but you're losing the ability to do that if you listen to audiobooks like I think I do, and as I think they're more often advertised, is when I'm commuting or when I'm working on something in my attic, doing plumbing, something where the speaker's over there, the phone's over there, and the story's going to be what it's going to be at the rate it's going to be told. And by taking the ability of the reader to control the pacing of it, it kind of makes it harder to interpret the data. You're getting information, but it's not at the rate that is optimal for you. I consider it in a way of driving past a beautiful mountain range, but never rolling the window down to actually see the mountain range with your eye. You can get the image, you can understand, why it's beautiful, but there's something in between it, and it also provides a layer of distance between. And that's why I believe that reading is better for learning and developing long-term memories of what you read, because you are consuming it almost in a similar manner to consuming whole wheat bread, as opposed to having something easy and starch like a white bread. You're getting it, it's longer and harder to digest, but you're doing it at a rate that's optimal for you and for your enjoyment. And the enjoyment is the final point that I think is lost, is a huge concession when we use audiobooks and listen to podcasts, and that is the art of writing. Writing and reading are inseparable. I mean, obviously that's a truism, but the way that writers put together their stories, they are doing it from the perspective that the person is going to read it. And that can be something as simple as syntax, using different literature devices that only make sense when it's being unfolded as you read it. When you hear some of those stories, or you hear it read to you, sometimes it just loses the magic. The dialogue that you're reading between characters, for example, when you look at a dialogue in a story, people don't talk like they do in stories. I mean, unless you're reading like a script or something like that, it's a different type of communication. You can not only see adjectives or different verbs associated with how that person's reading, but you also can form in your mind that conversation. When you hear it read to you, you're losing kind of the magic of being able to get funneled into what the author is trying to convey. And that is a huge concession, and why I think relying solely on audible books is something that is a detriment to someone who's trying to enjoy reading. One interesting quote that I always come back to when I can think about this, and I think about it more than I like to admit, is actually a quote from Stephen King's On Writing, A Memoir to the Craft, which ironically I only have listened to as an audiobook. It's read by Stephen King on Audible. It's actually one of the best books I've read. It's truly incredible if you're interested. But anyway, he proposed that telling a story, it's not about the person who is telling the story. The writer doesn't tell the story. They provide the components to the reader, and then the reader creates the story. So that underscores what I believe is the most important part of writing, and that is the ability for the writer to take the reader by the hand and guide them through their story, and to tell the story in a way that they want it to be told. To a certain degree, that everything will always be subjective, but it's much more of a personal relationship that gets lost when listening to a story. So reading is something that I believe that everybody should make time for. I am not saying anything against audible books, and I know I might be harping a little bit on them, and I think they certainly have a place within the world of reading and listening to things. They're very convenient. You can tear through books, and sometimes certain books they actually lend themselves better to audible books than they do, particularly science books or books that were written to be audiobooks, which there's starting to be a fair amount of them are. But I would argue that things such as classical literature and even certain novels cannot be completely enjoyed while listening to them. It takes the effort to go through and sit down and read the book, and go through the struggle and the more difficult time a person has reading in order to fully appreciate what the story is and how it's supposed to be told. So, fellow Toastmasters and honored guests, I hope you make the time in your lives to read. And if you don't have the time to read, I'd strongly encourage you to make the time. Even something small, it is something that provides a lot of enrichment to our lives. It stretches the imagination, it gives us control, and allows us to engage with a writer who has a story to tell. And it helps us tell our own stories by sharing in the experience and words of others. So for that, thank you.